Well, welcome back, folks. I think everything is working. I have no technical explanation for what goes wrong there. I really don't. And I would consider myself a relatively technical person. No, the new mics are not in yet. They are in Costa Rica, and they're being shipped to the office of the logistics company about 45, 50 minutes away from me. And they should be in tonight or tomorrow morning, and then the courier should be in shortly after that. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, looking forward to that quite a bit. So I'm going to just do a check here to make sure everything is working. Yep. Hi, Kevin. Welcome back, folks. So I'm assuming Linda put the coffee on. Evening, buddy. Okay. So I'm assuming I can be heard? Yep. Okay, great. Now tonight I want to do a show that how would I put this? I'm going to use other people's material. Now I'm hesitant to do this. And thanks, Spencer. The reason that I'm hesitant to do this, I don't like to do it often, is there's a whole class of broadcaster that does this. They just comment on other media personalities. Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro does it, Russell Brand, and it's just, I don't know. I don't need to do that. I'd like to think that I have something to say, so I don't usually do that. But tonight I am, and I'll give you my reason. I listened to just a phenomenal podcast last night, political. Okay, so you guys know I like everything, right? Like I like the deeply esoteric, and I like the political, social, economic, and so this one was political. Although old Tucker there is starting to straddle the spiritual and the political quite a bit as well, isn't he? And I admire his courage. It's not easy um, to be a figure that big and pronounce your faith and say that you were attacked by a demon and things like this. So I applaud his courage, and I think he's doing a fantastic job. Okay, so this podcast was with a gentleman by the name of Chris Moritz. Moritz. You'll see it if you go to Tucker's site. If you go to YouTube, you go to Spotify, wherever you watch your material. And it's Chris Moritz, How Kamala Gave California to Their Cartels and the Psychopaths Ruling the Democrat Party. Now, in a sane world where people could think, and people could do their own research, and people could confirm their own beliefs, this podcast would be on Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party for at least a decade, and they'd have to completely reform themselves the way political parties have had to do in the past. But that's not the time or the place in which we live, unfortunately. We live in a different time, and we live in a different place. And there is some kind of cognitive impairment going on with people. And I'm seeing it encroach on people who were previously immune, which I find amazing. Now, not to toot my own horn, but the people I find most lucid, most engaging, and most impossible to fool are people like myself who are from North America and who have left and who now live in some other place, like Costa Rica, like Panama, like Colombia, like El Salvador, or other places. And Latin America is a wonderful place to deprogram, by the way. If you were to come down and live in Latin America for even a year, you could shed most of your North American social programming, just living with these wonderful people. Sometimes irritating, as all people are, but generally wonderful people. So without further ado, let's get this, and I'm going to play long chunks of this. This is why I'm setting it up, right? Because Bruce is getting lazy. He doesn't podcast anymore. He's playing other people's material. But that's not the case here, because I'm going to use this stuff to build upon, okay? And that's why I want to do it. So this segment we're about 22 minutes into the podcast, and the segment I'm going to play is called Kamala's Nefarious Motives. Now, so you know all of these propositions that were, first of all, to understand what the Democratic plan for the United States is, you have to understand California. California is the test tube. California is the proof of concept. How to collapse a perfectly functioning economy and how to destroy a perfectly functioning society in 10, 15, 20 years or less. And you could write a textbook on it now for the KGB or for any intelligence agency, just on the politics that have transpired in California. And Kamala Harris has been a big part of this, okay? She was the Attorney General of the state of California, one of the biggest, in terms of population, states in the United States. In fact, that's actually worthy of a fact check. Okay, so let's ask this question aloud and see if we can answer it. What is the most populous state in the U.S.? It is, in fact, California, by like 35% more than anything even close. So California has a population of 38 million. Maybe one of the cats peed on the mic. I'm not sure that's useful commentary. So it is definitely California with 38 million. Texas is next with 28 million. Florida with 21 million. And then it goes to Pennsylvania with 13 million. So I find that very, very interesting, okay? So California, the state of California, actually has about the same or a little bit more people than the entire country of Canada. Last I heard, we were up around 37 million in Canada. So it is the most populous state in the United States. As a state, not as an integrated component of the overall GDP, which stands for Gross Domestic Product, for those of you who have never studied economics. They have, I think, at their height, they had the 5th largest economy in the world, and that's comparing to other countries. That's just taking the economy of California and measuring it against other national economies, and California is just a state within the United States. This is how prosperous California was. And so everybody should be asking, what happened? And not a lot of people aren't. And the media doesn't focus on it. So I guess you could say conservative media does, but the takeover of the mind has already begun. Whatever it is that they're doing, it's definitely working. I can see the mind control working. I can see people's ability to critically think fading. And it's a number of factors, okay? It's not all just what we think it might be that happened in 2020, which you can't say aloud without getting a strike against your YouTube channel, but you know what I mean. It's a lot of things. It's digital television is one thing. The screens in people's hands is another, whether it be a cell phone or what have you. It's a lot of things. It's a failure to think. People don't read anymore. They don't think. It's a number of things, but the critical analysis is just somehow gone. Now, I was mentally preparing this podcast earlier today, and I was reminded of The Light of Darkness, which I wrote in 2020, 4 years ago, with Bob Wiegand, Robert Wiegand, Bob. And he described to me the entities, beings, whatever you want to call them, that he saw on the astral, associated in a one-to-one way with every sitting member of the Council of 300. And the Council of 300 is, according to Bob, and I'm in no position to disagree with him, I've subsequently come across books and tomes and commentary about this that corroborate what Bob said, but the Council of 300 is the organization of organizations at the human level. Okay? And what Bob saw was a being that looks like a human being, but it's not human, behind everyone at the Council of 300. That you may look upon them as looking like the Men in Black, okay? Which is that in and of itself is very interesting, the whole Men in Black phenomenon, right? Because where do we see that on the planet? You know, and the Men in Black look sort of like Max von Sydow in The Exorcist. You know, the uniform of the Jesuit with the fedora and the black suit. And they look like rabbis. Very interesting. And Bob was able to see these beings. And he said they control us, first of all, because they're much smarter, super smart, outrageous IQs, like way beyond human measurement. And they have no feeling. And that was the key thing, was they have no feeling. And so we are ruled, or we are governed by people who have no feeling. This is a critical thing because it's a spiritual insight. I have feeling, and I don't want a life without feeling. Feeling is what makes life livable. I don't see how you could even have what anybody could call an even normal life without feeling. But there's a lot of people who disagree with me. There's a lot of people who might think that feeling just gets in the way. I suppose it depends what kind of life you want. Without any further ado, because that's a rather long introduction now, I'm at 13 minutes, I'm going to play this section, okay? So here we go.
Now is the time to get to motive. What would be the motive of a so-called criminal justice reformer of George Soros? Kamala Harris's motives are always political, so we already answered that question. But of the sincere believers in this stuff, the idea that the criminals are the real victims, free them, stealing should be legal, et cetera, like why? What's driving them?
Well, I think there are those who are push for these initiatives who are just pure sociopaths, and they are not really committed ideologically. They galvanize around it because it's in vogue and it allows them access to money, like Soros money. George Gascon is probably the greatest example.
I'm going to interrupt quite a bit, okay? In fact, I should probably just add my camera and mic to the video and just stop it without switching screens back and forth, and I'll probably do that in a minute. But one of the critical things that took down California was the liberalization of the justice system. And why that and by the way, that was all written by Kamala Harris. All that blood's on her hands. That woman is evil. Okay? And now I don't say that in an alarmist way. And believe it or not, I believe we all go through evil in our incarnation cycles on this planet. I think we have to learn about it. I don't think it's you just come into the world and you're good all the time. I think that there are times that you're just evil. But Kamala Harris did that. Kamala Harris did a lot of it, okay? And so the moment you see them liberalizing the justice system and people not paying for their actions because there's a debt there, even spiritually there's a debt there, karmically to the society there's a debt there. That debt has to be paid. And these people are not paying their debts. And in many ways they're being rewarded. All right, let's get back to it.
Example of this, not an ideologue, by the way, a very bad, stupid lawyer from what everyone says, but not an ideologue, a sociopath is how he's been described to me, as have some of these other rogue prosecutors. But then there's the true believers. And within criminal justice reform, I think that it's fair to say there's a spectrum of radicalism. Some initiatives I think have like good intentions. We do want rehabilitation in society. We do want the opportunity to build one's life back by a bad choice.
Sure.
That's a Christian value,
Of course.
but it goes much, much deeper than that. And I think that as you peel back the layers of criminal justice reform and look at what they're specifically advocating for, it ranges not only from mass incarceration solutions, but also, frankly, defunding the police, pacifying the police through, ideas like community policing, in which police are sort of characterized now as social workers rather than in law enforcement.
Emasculating them, turning
Of course,
them
emasculating.
into
Well,
women.
literally emasculating them. Literally. I mean, women now make a huge portion of overall cops. And, there's the cops I've talked to who are like, serious, like threatening figures, but good guys. They see the police today as an absolute joke. And I can tell you, and I'll get into it, about how bad it's getting at the LAPD and other law enforcement agencies, but through erosion because of these policies and morale erosion. But back to criminal justice reform, I think that it's really important to strip away euphemisms. And when I was evaluating, the tenets of this movement, it became apparent to me that not only did it place the offender above victim, it fundamentally resulted in the diffusion of crime and the spreading of suffering as a policy choice. So as laws like
trying to wreck other people's neighborhoods, safe neighborhoods, affluent neighborhoods, white neighborhoods,
correct,
with crime on purpose because they were orderly, affluent, and white.
That's right. And I can tell you, like, for instance,
so that's not a figment of the imagination. That's an actual choice, you think?
Well, I can for sure. BLM activists say that mass stealing of retail stores is a form of reparation. This is crime. I call this crime equity. This concept, and it's not even something said like in jest or flippantly. It's actually a very deep and dark idea with historical analogs. I think particularly pertinent would be what happened in Rhodesia, where criminals are released from prisons in mass and sent on essentially government sanctioned theft of white farmer land and other property. And this is a form of, kind of anarchic tyranny.
Right. So this is crime as a means of totalitarian control and as a tool of racial grievance.
It is a crime as a means to redress historical grievances through collective punishment.
So we're mad about what your ancestors did, so we hope your daughter gets raped.
Correct.
Yeah. That's about as evil as it gets.
Yeah. And I will give you some example. The second in charge at the LA County District Attorney's Office, the chief of staff, a woman named Tiffany Blacknell, who is proud to have been a rioter and looter in the 1992 Rodney King.
Is a prosecutor?
She came from the public defender's office. Gascon has filled the.
Wait, but she is currently a prosecutor?
She is Gascon's chief of staff.
Wow.
She
was a rioter?
Yeah. She's written about
during
this.
the race riots of 92.
Correct. Yeah.
Where people were murdered for their skin color.
Yeah, Asians in particular.
Yeah, and whites. Yeah. But lots of Koreans. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to the issue of Asians being targeted because that's another phenomenon that's taking place. But Tiffany Blacknell is a avowed racist. She wears a T-shirt that's she's posted on Instagram. It says like "Police are trained to kill us," right? And she is effectively number 2 at the DA's office. When Santa Monica and the west side of Los Angeles was being firebombed during the George Floyd riots, and citizens were bemoaning this.
That's the white part of town, just
Exactly,
for those
the
who
white
aren't from
part of
there.
town. Tiffany Blacknell said, "Oh, go cry me a river."
Out loud?
She posted on like Twitter or Facebook.
Oh, that's really scary.
Well, I mean, this is who Gascon has surrounded himself with. So Tiffany Blacknell is a great example of like a true believer. Gascon, no, he's too stupid to be a believer. Like Kamala Harris. I find it very ridiculous when people say Kamala Harris is a Bolshevik, because to be a Bolshevik, you actually have to know about philosophy.
Right.
You have to know about dialectics.
Right.
She
You have to make it through Das Kapital.
Kamala Harris only knows Kamala Harris, although she doesn't even know that because we can't figure out what her name is.
She's a child, obviously. She's a tool of greater power, obviously. I mean, she wound up there by accident because of her skin color.
So the laws continue to get worse from there. And in 2020, that was the catalyst. So the George Floyd...
But just to be clear, I just want to linger on this for 1
Yeah, of
second.
course.
Just to be clear, you believe that crime is not an accident. Crime is a result of intentional policy. Crime is the point of the policy. And part of the aim is to punish people for their skin color with crime.
Of course.
Well, not of course. That's the sickest thing I've heard this year.
Well, it's extremely evil, and it is demonstrably the case because these laws were so they were so obviously negligent and reckless. Everyone knew, all the law enforcement agencies, all the district attorneys came out against these kinds of initiatives, saying that the result is going to be dangerous criminals on the street. Dangerous criminals on the street. This is our future. And they passed it anyway. The voters passed it. Kamala Harris wrote the language. And again, Prop 47 is called the Safe Schools and Neighborhoods Act. Right? So the idea is that the funding, budget savings from moving...
Okay, you get the point, right? I mean, this has all been done intentionally, and that's why I say that California is the prototype. I thought California is the prototype, folks, okay? So they're going to use California as the model to collapse the country under a Kamala Harris presidency if she gets in. I've been talking about this in so many ways it isn't funny. This ties into The Devil in Us, a memoir of you and me. It ties into the extraterrestrial agenda. Believe it or not, this is being done at the root by extraterrestrials because everything that happens on this planet is done by extraterrestrials when it's done in the way it's being done now. Now, that's not to say that the normal patterns of action and reaction are not here. They are here. And that's me referring to karma, which is an operative principle down here. But those karmic cycles are being exacerbated. Okay, just like what might be a normal forest fire in California is being exacerbated. It's being encouraged to burn more. And that's probably not the best example, because I don't think that those are naturally occurring forest fires. So we've been watching the decimation of California, and let's be honest, the entire West Coast, for a number of years now. At least, almost a decade, right? It goes right back to the Trump presidency, because all the big California fires were going on during the Trump presidency. And he was a tad dismissive about them. And maybe that wasn't the best thing to do, honestly. I realize that we're in some kind of civil war now, being run by ideologues, and being backed by multi-billionaires. In the case of the left, it's certainly George Soros, who is on public record, like in a formal sit-down interview. This guy is on record saying he hates the United States. Okay? So George Soros is a very negative influence, a very negative person in flesh. I like the way they characterize these things in the video, destroyers and creators. And we're handing all the power to the destroyers. So the criminals are being let out, they're not being prosecuted, and the people who sustain the state of California, pay the taxes, are being terrorized, being told they can't defend themselves, they can't, shoot intruders or they're going to go to prison. And this is the reality that people are being forced to live in. I mean, it's bordering on North Korea. I'm not even being hyperbolic. It's just an absolutely insane situation. I don't know how anybody could live in that situation. Now we're leading up to a segment here on who is really tacitly controlling the state of California. And it's Chris Moritz's contention, his thesis, which he explains quite eloquently, that it's actually the Mexican cartels. And I believe in a Trump presidency, the Mexican cartels will be dealt with as well. And I feel the need to repeat myself, and after talking to a lot of people off air who listen to my podcast, I'm going to be less afraid of repeating myself, because some of the concepts I trade in are elliptical. They're slippery to get a grasp on in your mind. And repetition is a teaching tool, so I'm going to become a little bit more repetitive. And for those of you who get it the first time, I apologize, but this isn't a conversation with you over a coffee. This is me talking to a group of people, which is, I'd say for every podcast between YouTube, Rumble, Substack, and Spotify, I'd say I have about 500 listeners a podcast. So that would be like a high school auditorium in a small town. So that's a pretty good number. And it's all being well received. And on that, let me go over the cornerstones of my podcast. This is fundamentally a socio-political, spiritual podcast, in which I talk about the world we live in and explain how the multidimensional reality and the energetic structure we live in, which is psycho-spiritual, creates the effects we live under, whether they be magical, literal, or incomprehensible. They're all coming from the same, largely two-dimensional structure right now, which is physical astral, which would be astrological and physical. Okay, astrology pertains to the astral plane. And another thing I do is I don't let people off the hook. Okay, I don't look at a situation and allow my emotions to run away with me and say, that's horrible, that's horrible, oh my God, what are we going to do? I mean, it is horrible what's happening in California. There's no doubt about that. But before we get into the next segment on the cartels and how Kamala Harris allowed them to take over California, I want you to remember one thing. For these negative forces, and this ties into one of the major sub-themes in the Talamanca Review, which is demonology and the negative side of reality, and the negative pole of reality, both physically and astrally and causally, which would be the time dimension. And that is that if you're good and you're righteous and you're centered and you're living according to the law of the divine, the natural law, the divine law, there's very little that the negative force can do to you, which is why I can write books like The Devil and Us and commiserate for a period of time with very powerful demonic entities who did want the book written. You have to live according to God's law, the Creator's law. You know, the God is a word I'm hesitant to use. I'm comfortable with it at 58. I grew up with it. All the podcasters these days who are doing pseudo-spiritual podcasts call it source. Again, I don't care much for that word because it's devoid of all feeling. And God is full of feeling. And God is love. The principal characteristic of the Creator is love. So how does this causal force and this self-responsibility apply to the collapse of America and the collapse of California? Well, if it is true that the Mexican cartels have taken over California, we must ask ourselves in a logical sequence of questions, how did they become so powerful? Does it have anything to do with America's love of recreational narcotics? Right? People still buy that crap. They still buy Coke knowing that every gram of Coke comes with blood on it and murder and probably dark ritual energy involved in it now, because all of those cartels are religiously satanic. You know, you could call them the reincarnation of the Aztecs if you like, and they do further on in this podcast. But self-responsibility dictates that maybe the users should have been punished as much as the dealers. Okay? Maybe the users should have been punished as much as the dealers back in the day. But that's not the case. But you shouldn't do drugs. Especially not drugs like cocaine and crystal meth and heroin and fentanyl and all of these sorts of things, okay? They destroy lives, and I don't care how desperate you are. If you go into a period of desperation, drink whiskey for 6 months, get it out of your system, and then go to an AA meeting, or get yourself, smoke an ounce of weed every month, okay, which a lot of people do these days to cope. And but when you go to the hard drugs, nothing's going to be solved. You're just like compounding the interest on your problem, making it worse and worse and worse and worse. So self-responsibility has to be accepted here. The cartels are as powerful as they are because they became trillionaires because of America's love of drugs. And the love of drugs comes in large measure due from the perversion. Okay, because drugs enhance sexual experience. Let's be honest about this. Let's put it all out on the table. It is what it is. There's a lot of people who like to get some coke and get funky. You think there wasn't coke at those Diddy parties? Of course there was coke there. Or he was probably using some special concoction that an intelligence agency or somebody else gave him. But when you look at all the problems of America now, whether it be the undue influence of Israel on the United States Congress or what's happening in California, in each and every instance there's self-responsibility at the root of it. The compromised participants in the federal government who are owned by the Mossad, or a combination of the Mossad and the CIA, are owned because of something they did and the other party became aware of it, and it's something that the person who's owned would not want to come out into public. And I think it's something far worse than just maybe embarrassing your wife and your family. It's probably in many instances much worse than that. But America became an owned country because it gave itself up. It gave up its moral center. And that self-responsibility has to be taken in every instance, whether you have a personal problem or whether this is a collective problem like a nation. And Canada's no better. So let's get back to this. The next segment is California is run by Mexican drug cartels. And it is, in fact, a doozy. Here we go.
Maybe forever. But in any event, around 2010, there was a hostile takeover of the narcotics distribution market in California, which had been otherwise the domain of black gangs.
Native-born black people.
Legacy black gangs had run narcotics and dope trade.
Can I just say, at least, even if they're drug dealers or gang members, they're still Americans.
Oh,
and
let me tell you,
we share a common history. And
actually, they have principles.
That's kind of the point I was making. At least they're part of this country, for sure.
I'll tell you in a minute how principled they are. Maybe we even agree with them on some things, because
I suspect we're voting the same way this November. Just throwing that out there.
Well, so when the cartels moved into California, they said to all the black gangs, if you sell dope without our permission, we will, quote, cut your head off. And they meant that literally. So every black gang had to then find an alternative revenue stream or get their dope supply from the cartels, from Hispanic gangs, because all Hispanic gangs in California kind of operate as a extension of gangs above them, which are based in prison, and that's another issue. But the highest level gang in California is called the Mexican Mafia, and it's a prison
Yes.
gang. But this gang is the ultimate authority, really, on all Latino gangs in the state. There are 200,000 to 300,000 gang members in California. 63%.
300,000?
Yes. For reference, the U.S. National Guard has 250,000 members. There's 1.2 million gang members in the United States. And in California, 63%.
So that's bigger than the active duty U.S. military.
Yeah. I think so.
Oh, wow.
And 63% are Latino. So as a result of this volume and numerical advantage, they control the prisons. So the Mexican Mafia, which is actually like a legacy organization, it has a long history.
Oh, a long history,
right.
50 years anyway.
Yeah. And they are incredibly powerful. And as it was told to me by this incredible LA County Sheriff Sergeant, who, and I'm not going to mention the names of any of my sources for their protection and safety, but this gentleman said to me that he was head of Major Crimes Bureau for the LA County Sheriffs and 25-year veteran of the force, now in private security. And he said to me that the prisons rule the street. So effectively, the criminal economy of California, which is in the tens of billions, maybe 100 billion, passes through California state prisons. So that is a prima facie indictment of the failure of our prisons, because from prison, the Mexican Mafia is ordering hits, running drug trades, human trafficking, you name it. And they do so as proxies of the Mexican drug cartels.
In Mexico.
Yes.
So this is...
Well, they're not in Mexico. They're in California.
But this is exactly what destroyed El Salvador and has wrecked Mexico and Guatemala, is drug gangs operating, their leaders operating from prison.
With impunity.
With impunity. So let's ask you just a side note, because I can't resist. So in Mexico, Guatemala, and Salvador, and probably in other countries as well, the drug gangs are effectively religious organizations based on Satanism.
Oh, absolutely.
Is that true in California as well?
Well, I will tell you that the law enforcement and prosecutors that I talked to would say that the illegal alien gang element is characterized by extreme violence.
Right. Like extreme, like
ISIS violence.
Right. unnecessary violence, not
Well-
just shooting people to death as the
Well,
black gangs historically do.
There's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, in my research, I couldn't help but sort of trace like the anthropological and historical basis for this extreme violence. And
We're back to the Aztecs, aren't we?
well, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Of course, because you have to consider the fact that we've seen so-called narco-terrorists, narco-empires many, many times since the 70s.
Yeah.
And yeah, they killed a lot of people, but they shot them, or they used car bombs, or basic kind of mafia style hits.
Right.
And that is also the case for the Italian mafia.
The Genoveses sold heroin. They didn't behead anyone.
And that's the case for the triads.
Exactly.
It's the case for the Russians even.
Yes.
But in Mexico and in Central America, what we see is what I call cultural atavism. And it's the notion that there are certain cultural traits and practices that survive the generations and are amalgamated into a new society. And Mexico is it's a wonderful place in many, many ways.
I agree.
I love it. But it is a fusion of indigenous people and Spanish Catholics.
And European.
Right. And many of those traits that survived the Aztec period. And I will tell you, the level of brutality of the Aztecs is beyond belief.
Yes.
They killed 200,000 people a year, at least, in sacrifice.
The Aztecs were so committed to human sacrifice, and not just sacrifice, but the torture of living people unto death.
And children, by the way.
Oh, of course. And not just the Aztecs, but the Maya and the Inca also. That it does, in the end, as much as you sort of hate the conquistadors because they were brutal and all that, you root for the conquistadors with everything you have.
Of course. I will tell you, the Aztecs worshipped a lightning and rain god called Tlaloc. And when there were droughts, they would sacrifice.
Yeah, you get the point, right? It's not. I would point out at this juncture of the Talamanca Review in this particular episode, Believe the Unbelievable. In the history of Costa Rica, only 2 drug enforcement agency, 2 DEA warrants have been issued from the United States for Costa Rican narco traffickers, and they've both been my neighbors. The first one is dead now. He got shot in a gang-related violence in a bar down in town. And the other one I won't say too much about because he's. I will say this: when the Abaca comes in, my Abaca farm, the male banana fiber I sell to the German company, although the German company went bankrupt. So I have personally been injured by Joe Biden blowing up Nord Stream 2 now. Okay, it's amazing how these circles close. But he used to loan us our tractor. And all of these guys in the Sinaloa cartel coming to this mountain, they drop by and pay their respects to my wife because she runs the mountain. I'm not even joking, okay? I've seen them come up in the Lincoln Navigators, Donna Rosemary. So when you're speaking to somebody respectfully in Latin culture, if it's a male, you say Don. So a lot of people here call me Don Bruce. I know it sounds like The Godfather, but it's not the same thing in Latin culture. And my wife is Donna Rosemary. And it's because my wife's family founded the mountain. They were the first family up here, and the only people up here before then were the natives. And when my father-in-law, who was the leader of the mountain, unelected, but that's the way it works over here. It's kind of unspoken tribal is what it is. And everything is by natural law. But when my father-in-law passed, the natural leader of the mountain became my wife, Rosemary. And she runs the mountain now, and she does all the good stuff too. And that means maintain the school and take care of all of its books, maintain the church, and maintain the medical clinic we have, where a doctor comes up once a month and everybody comes in to get checkups and to present certain ailments, right? All of the people living on the mountain, Nicaraguan, Costa Rican, or native. And I will tell you one anecdote about living in a geography with high-level cartel people. We had a piece of equipment stolen by a crackhead from the medical clinic. It was a super bright medical light for looking at things, right? And the day after it happened, my wife put the word out to the whole mountain saying, I don't know if the medical clinic is going to continue up here because somebody stole such and such a light. And the Ministry of Health, or what the CAHA they call it over here, that's an abbreviation. I won't tell you the whole thing, but they don't like when that stuff happens. And if you can't control your pueblo, they'll just deny the service, and you'll have to go to a clinic in town or a hospital every time you have a medical problem, because it's considered an act of compassion to bring doctors into rural communities. And if the community doesn't respect it, you could lose it. So my wife puts the word out, and this is overheard, or somehow it gets to the guy who's got the warrant out for him. He puts word out. That light better be back in 3 days, or we're going to find you. The light was back the next day in the medical clinic. Whoever stole it snuck back in at like 3 a.m, put it back where they stole it from, and that was it. Right? So it's brutal street justice, but it works. But, you know, what are you going to do? Now, the irony of that is the crackhead is the victim of the cartels. So it's it's a cannibalistic culture that will collapse at some point. Then, because what happens when America goes bankrupt? How are the cartels going to make any money? Okay? And bankruptcy affects everything. It affects prostitution, human trafficking, child trafficking, everything. So how are they going to make any money? And this is how you can tell that we're in a time of crisis right now. Because historically, criminal organizations have always been parasitic. And I say that in a biological sense. I don't say that in a derogatory sense. The principal characteristic of a parasite is that it requires a healthy host. When the host dies, the parasite dies. And so something is going to have to be done about this, because if the cartels really do run California, and I believe they do on a certain level, then they're going to have to start policing. What will happen in the end is there will be a de facto legalization of drugs, meaning de facto means it may not actually be on paper that drugs are legal, but the police will stop making arrests, and the street dealers and the managers in the drug distribution organization will have to accept some responsibility for street policing, burglarizations and things like this, because you can't have that much power without responsibility. It's impossible. The moment you stop being the parasite and you are actually the host, then you have to provide the responsibilities of the host. And if you don't, the whole thing collapses. So if I were you folks, I would be praying right now that this kind of organic intelligence exists in the cartels. Because if they fail to manage the host, the whole thing is going to collapse. We'll see. I don't know. Yeah, that's right, Don Bruce. So let's just... So I'll just briefly, because I listened to the whole podcast yesterday. So you know those videos you see where like an Apple store gets swarmed by 30 people? That is black organized crime now, because as this gentleman said, Chris Moritz in California, the blacks got pushed out of the street dealing, the Crips and Bloods got wiped out by the Latino gangs, and now what they do is they do organized theft. and they go and they swarm stores and they rob everything and they sell it on eBay, and that's how they make a living now. Okay? Very, very interesting how this whole ecosystem works. It's very, very interesting. And throughout it all has been the deliberate mismanagement and aid to collapse given by the legislation and the prosecution of Attorney General Kamala Harris, who is now in contention to run the country. And again, forget your emotions. They want you to be emotional thinking about this election, okay? And as I've said numerous times on the Talamanca Review, Donald Trump is no saint. We all know that, okay? But all you got to do is look at Kamala Harris's record in California, working as Attorney General in a government run by Gavin Newsom, and look at the damage they've done to California. And I sometimes wonder if it isn't intentional. You know, I think I could make a relatively convincing thesis, and I will. Let me do it. There is a possibility that California is being deliberately destroyed and being set up to be taken over by the Chinese. And this may go all the way up the west coast, from California all the way up to British Columbia in Canada. And that would be the closest point of entry to the North American continent for the Chinese, who cross the Pacific to get here. Right? So they would want Pacific entrance and access to this landmass, which is North America. I've seen white papers written by generals in California suggesting the same thing, written decade and a half ago. And there is also strong circumstantial evidence that the Chinese intelligence, through the triads, the organized crime of Chinese culture, works with the government in China. They've always been left hand, right hand working together, okay? And there have been connections made between the Mexican cartels and Chinese intelligence and Chinese scientists teaching them how to make fentanyl. Okay? So it's just kind of astounding when you think about it. And all the while, Gavin... And remember when Xi Jinping came... The last time Xi Jinping came to the United States, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, he did not visit Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in Washington. He did an official state visit. Number one guy in China, Xi Jinping, he did an official state visit to California to have meetings with Gavin Newsom. And what did Gavin Newsom do? He cleaned up California for the visit. He got all the homeless people off the street, and he cleaned up the streets, like literally broom and dustpan, cleaned them up, got the garbage, the needles, the feces. He cleaned up San Francisco for Xi Jinping's visit. Xi Jinping hopped on the Chinese state jet, went back to Beijing, and San Francisco went back to being what San Francisco is, an open sewer. So, what's going on? Okay? Now, even with all of this going on in front of us, there are still people who think Kamala Harris is the better choice. Okay? Now, this is the principal mental affliction in the United States now, and it is a cognitive disorder. It's almost a mental disease. Okay? Americans have become a people who will put ideals ahead of reality. Okay, and they're not even well-founded ideals. They're not even spiritually based ideals. They're not even universal moral law or divine law, or as Mark Passio says, natural law. These are those ideals you should stand up for. These are just ideals that have been put into them by liberal high schools and liberal colleges, and they would rather watch the wealthiest state in the United States go up in flames, literally and figuratively, than publicly abandon their ideals and be called a heretic by the cult of the progressive left. And this infection has spread throughout the United States. And the largest supporters of Kamala Harris are baby boom and Gen Z white women. Thank you very much, Karens. Thank you very much. Okay? Let's do one more segment, And I'm running out of time here. I only like to do this. This might be my last podcast without the Blue Yeti. Woohoo! And I'm getting the new M4 Mac Mini. I got a buddy coming in from Texas to visit at the end of the month, and I'm going to have it sent to him, and he's going to bring it in. So let's get to this. Hold on, give me a second. All right, so let's get this. The last segment I want to do here is there's a couple here. Okay, so the psychopathic behavior of the Democratic Party. Let's start here.
Progressive.
Yeah, or quote, democracy.
Or democracy.
I guess and I've heard Victor say that thing, and I've nodded along as he said it, and not to be picayune about it, but if I could just defend feudalism against what we're seeing in California right now, the idea of feudalism, while repugnant to the American mind and my mind, was still based on mutual need. The guy who owned the property, the lord of the manor, was dependent upon his serfs as they were dependent upon him. I mean, it was a symbiotic relationship.
For sure. Yeah.
So if the serfs died, he became impoverished.
Well, the symbiotic relationship here is that the serfs provide electoral hegemony.
For sure. But I guess what I'm saying is, over time, a feudal family had a built-in incentive to, at the bare minimum, make sure that their serfs weren't dying of fentanyl ODs.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas I don't see that happening in California. They have no skin in the game.
2022 to 2023, there were 11,400 fentanyl overdoses, the highest in the country.
In California.
California.
So, I guess they don't, maybe to put a finer point on it, the people who, whereas the lord in feudalism needed the labor of the serfs, the lords of California do not need the labor of their serfs.
Because the industries are service industries or they're tech, and they require a very, very small number of people to do.
Exactly.
Right. And that's part of the deindustrialization, financialization of the state that which provided for middle class jobs and opportunity that is increasingly fleeting and fleeing in the state, and especially in Southern California. And as a result of that, especially the exodus of aerospace and defense industries from the state, we have, Republican voters have left. And LA County, which used to be a Republican stronghold, became a blue stronghold. And at that point, California became a one-party state. And one-party states are characterized by corruption, inefficiency, psychosis, I would argue, and all sorts of evils. And ultimately, it is the antithesis of democracy. And of course, that is exactly what these people claim that they are defending. Democracy! Exclamation point.
Yeah, no, the ironies are manifold. Wait, can you just back up one moment? I never thought about that. So you said one-party states about corruption, of course, inefficiency, all true. Psychosis.
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
Well, I think because of the laws that we've seen put into effect. The laws were so obviously going to engender criminality
across the state. Right. It's like in law, in torts, the idea of negligence is the foreseeability of harm.
Right.
And that is what really triggers a liability.
But you knew this could happen, but you let it happen anyway.
And so California's government and frankly uneducated voters have inflicted a grievous tort upon the state. And I think that it is so reckless that, to me, it is psychotic. It is a form of psychotic, sociopathic behavior. And certainly many of the people implementing these policies are raving psychopaths. A really impressive young deputy district attorney in Alameda County said to me with
Was I off the video all this time? Okay, wow, what an idiot I am. Anyways, there you go. You get the gist of it, right? It's a shit show, folks. California is just a shit show. Like it is beyond the beyond. It is unbelievable that the Democratic Party would put one of the culprits responsible for the demise of the fifth largest economy in the world in contention for the presidential position in the United States of America. And it is a testament, and please don't take this the wrong way. I'm not trying to offend you, but I have to speak directly. It is a testament to the stupidity of the people. Okay? And again, going back to this you broke it, you bought it mentality, like the relationship with the cartels is contingent upon America's love of recreational drugs, even knowing that they kill lots of people to get them there. Okay? That is a karmic relationship that is coming home to roost now. But if Kamala Harris gets voted in, I have no sympathy for the United States. It deserves whatever it gets. And the only thing I find alarming at this point is the people supporting her. I mean, who are these people? Mark Cuban, Hollywood. Okay? This is the fiefdom they're talking about. It's all working good for them. They got theirs. They got their drugs. You know, they got their sex, they got their status, they got their Bentleys, their Rolls Royces. They live in policed neighborhoods. So what do they care? Okay? But for the rest of us, for the rest of the people in California, it must just be a living hell living there now, man. It must just be a living hell. Anyways, that's my show for tonight. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been